Hello and welcome back to Down to the Tyre. Today, I'm joined by my favourite racing commentator, which I'm aware is really going to ruin my chances of ever getting any other commentator to guest on here, but it's worth it. If you're a feeder series fan like you know I am, you will recognise this voice most recently from F4 UAE and Formula Regional Middle East, which I've told you all enough times to watch. So hopefully you listen to me. It's Jake Sanson. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Jem. Thank you very much indeed for inviting me to Down to the Tyre. It's a real privilege to come on. Thank you.
I'm so happy to have you here. I really want to there's so much I want to delve into. I want to go back to the start first, though. How did you get into racing? Because I always find people's origin stories of how they started watching motorsport really interesting. And then also, how did you get into commentating on racing?
Wow, it's an interesting story. I've told it a few times, and I think people have told me I should write it in a book because it's a bit of an adventure. So I started motor racing after I had given up pursuing it. That's an absolute fact. I thought as a teenager, this is the one sport I'm meant to be involved with. I want to be a commentator. I want to be a TV presenter. I really feel this is what I can do. And it was by the time I was about 21, 22, I had just completely given up on the dream. I thought it's never going to happen. It's not going to be for me. No opportunities had come up. There were no real chances lying ahead of me. So I just went to normal remedial jobs, went to sort of the 9 to 5 slog. I was a cinema multifunctional attendant, retail assistant, double glazing salesman, waiter, cleaner, you name it. I did pretty much every job under the sun trying to make ends meet. And I went back to university, got my qualification as a youth work practitioner. So I was a youth worker. And I was working on the streets of Wrexham and Liverpool for a couple of youth work programs. And I needed extra cash because, as brilliant as the jobs were, they just weren't paying me enough to cover bills. So I needed a job that was going to be easy to get into and not really take too much in terms of training or, exhaustion. So I went to my local indoor karting circuit and just said, have you got any gigs going, any jobs of any kind going? And they said yes. And it was literally waving flags, sweeping floors, cleaning helmets, polishing race suits. That's all I was doing. I wasn't doing anything particularly glamorous. But I was there for sort of 3 months or so, and I noticed that every Saturday and every Sunday we had corporate Grand Prix events that people would come and they'd bring a lot of their friends to, or you'd have like stag nights, or it'd be a sports club or something, and they would have a proper Grand Prix, and we ran it like a Grand Prix. And I felt it was exciting, but it wasn't really selling us very well, that we were kind of flat. So I said to the management, we should have a commentator for this. We should really build this into an event. And the two boys, they kind of said, yeah, this is not a bad idea. Do you know anyone who could do that? And I said, yes, me. So I literally just invented the job for myself, essentially. So we did that every Saturday for about 6 months. And it was only when the North Shropshire Autograss Club came and used our event for a Christmas party. And fortunately, the chairman of that particular club, a brilliant chap called Ernie Ashley, he basically turned to me at the end of the event. It had been a fantastic night. We had a really great race because these guys were all proper club racers, and I had no idea. And he said, "What are you doing next year?" I said, "Well, this is this is what I'm doing." He said, "No, come and work for me. I'd love you to come and work for us." So it was literally just, getting headhunted to go and work for the Autograss Club, which is essentially, for those who don't know, it's a combination of the Indy 500, rallycross, and drag racing. It's kind of a weird amalgamation of the three, but it's fairly big here in the UK. It's kind of underground, it's grassroots, and not many people know it happens, but the racing is spectacular. There's an overtake every zero point 0.8 of a second on average. So it really is quite exciting stuff. Anyway, cut a long story short, I should say. I started doing that and then doing a few other bits and pieces voluntary to try and think, well, these guys want me, maybe a few others do. So I started attending Alton Park and Silverstone and Donington, basically anywhere that was relatively close for me to drive to, and started kind of crowbarring my way into commentary boxes and giving myself one or two races alongside the main commentator just to give myself a try. And there were some very kind people up and down the length and breadth of Britain, particularly the Porsche Racing Drivers Association of Great Britain, the British Superkart Club. They were amazing to me, very kind. Steve Reese over at Star Tracks in the short oval world, they gave me opportunities. And then I managed to have a conversation with John Hoyle, who was running the Super One karting championship, still does, which at the time was the British National Championship for karting. And I knew that he lived fairly close to me, and said, "Is there any opportunities to get involved in Super One?" Because I knew that Lewis Hamilton had done it and Jenson Button had done it. So I thought, well, this is a very good place to start looking for work. He said, "Well, speak to the guy who runs the television broadcast. He lives around the corner from you, by the way." "Oh, really, does he?" So I ended up having a meeting with Alan Taddy. I did 2 rounds presenting for them. And in the very first race weekend, I was interviewing the then Force India driver, Paul de Resta, for the television program, which was pretty good. And there was also another young kid on the grid that particular weekend who I interviewed called George Russell, who's done quite well for himself. And I did 2 weekends for them as a presenter. And then the next event they had was the TKM Festival. And I remember Alan being ill. And I said, well, I do commentary as well. And he had done the commentary prior to that. So he decided to give me a go. I did the TKM Festival, and then he said, "Right, I'm never commentating on anything I do ever again. It's you that's doing it." And then I sort of compromised and said, "Well, no, we should do it together." So yeah, we've been doing it together pretty much ever since. And at the end of that year, I had enough in my sort of show reel to take to TV channels, and I sent it to every television channel I could think of. I sent it to Sky, I sent it to BBC, to Channel 4, to Eurosport, and only Eurosport replied. They were the ones who decided they were going to give me an interview. I went to their offices in the UK, and after 15 minutes, they said, "We want you for next year." So I had literally gone from nothing to a Eurosport contract in about a year, and I still don't really know how I did that. And the rest, as they say, is history. You know, I've been doing it for 12 years. This is my 13th year now. And yeah, I still just cannot quite believe people want me to keep talking about racing cars. For me, it's just a passion and it's a hobby that's turned into my career.
That's amazing. I love it when someone gives an answer and I think of about 10 questions to ask them based on that answer. That is such an amazing story. Firstly, you mentioned Donington Park. I live 10 minutes down the road from Donington, so
Oh, I'm jealous.
I know. I'm very lucky and I go there all the time. But also you mentioned about liking to commentate alongside someone. We spoke about this briefly off camera as well, because a lot of the commentary that you've done in F4 UAE and Formula Regional Middle East, which we'll get on to talk about, was solo until the final round. What kind of are the differences of doing it with someone and alone, and why do you tend to lean more towards preferring to do it with a partner?
I think you can give a better show if you've got somebody in the box with you. I mean, if I'm just sat there essentially talking to myself for an hour, it's very, very difficult for me to feel like I can be entertaining enough by myself to keep the viewer's attention. If I've got somebody next to me, preferably a driver, you know, if I've got a driver next to me who knows what it's like to be in that high pressure situation, knows the circuit, knows the car, or at least knows the sort of the feeder series ladder situation, then I can get a lot more insight from them that I can never get myself. I see it very much as, you know, I do the commentary and they do the comment. You know, that's the way I kind of look at it, because they've got genuine insight, expertise. I've worked with some really good people in the past who have been former racers. So people like Chris McCarthy, Tom Gaymore, I recently worked with Ollie Webb. That was literally a last minute thing. I saw him on the starting grid at Dubai and I went, "What are you doing?" I went, "Nothing." I went, "Right, come in the box. Come in, come on. And I loved that it was so last minute, because we had no idea it was going to happen. The championship didn't know it was going to happen. I didn't know it was going to happen. I just thought, no, come on, come on. And I was kind of hoping he'd do all the races, but he ended up getting busy. But I love being able to drag that. And a few years ago, I ended up doing commentary for a race weekend at Snetterton with Sarah Moore. She's fantastic at commentary. She has no idea. She could do this full time. She really could. And I'm kind of hoping she does one day. But no, this to be able to have, you know, an expert who knows what it's like being a racing driver in the limelight, in the high pressure situation, knowing what it's like to try and grab a race drive, trying to get on top of a car in qualifying, trying to keep the tire temperatures, the brake temperatures up through the course of a race, knowing what it's like when you're following someone in the dirty air. I don't know any of this. You know, I've never been a racing driver. I always wanted to be, but I never had any money. These guys have been in that high cooker situation. They know what it's like to basically put their reputation and their career on the line for those 28 minutes plus one lap. They've been there. So if I've got somebody to bounce off of who knows what that high pressure situation is really like, you know, they can talk of it from a point of view of knowledge that I just cannot even scratch at. If I'm doing it on my own, then essentially I'm resorting to the YouTube comments, finding out what people's opinions are. And I'm one of the few commentators, I think, that really does that. A lot of people say, just stay away from the comments. You're never going to get anything of use and people are going to mock you and whatever. I love it. I love being able to interact with the community. And I'll always pick out the good comments and rather than the difficult ones. And it can be so funny because you pick out a few comments and then one person goes, careful, he's reading it. And I always find that really funny. I like to be able to catch people out because they just do not expect the commentator to read the comments. But I think it's really important. We're competing with so many different sports like football and tennis and cricket. We need to engage our fans. We need to let them know how valuable they are to us. So I think including them is quite important.
Yeah, because I think people almost assume that you're just in the commentary box, not paying attention to anything except for what's going on in front of you in the race.
Mm.
But I'm obviously frequently in those comment sections myself and everything. So I find it so fun that you read stuff and answer stuff. I think it's really cool and unique. As you said, no one else really does that. What other skills do you feel like make you a good commentator? Because I could answer why I think you're a great commentator, but I want to hear it from you.
It's a good question. I think self-analysis is very important, actually. And I think that's one of the things that I am good at. I do take time to analyze what I do. And I try to sort of study bits and pieces. Like if I've gone too far over the edge, I kind of go, you really should have reined that in a bit. And, you kind of, you do get quite analytical. One of the things I do like about the way I commentate now is that I bring a lot of my own mannerisms into it. When I first started, certainly in the first sort of 3-4 years of being a commentator, I kind of commentated in the way that I felt a commentator should, rather than the way that Jake Sanson should. I didn't really identify in myself how to bring my own personality to the table. And I'm quite a youthful sort of person. I like to say that, growing up is is optional. Growing old is mandatory. I'm very much a very sort of childish kind of person. I will still happily binge watch Thunderbirds, Stingray, Captain Scarlet, all those old shows I was a fan of as a kid. And I'm still very youthful. And I like the fact that, I had kids when I was very young. I'm still very, very youthful in my sort of mannerisms. And I get a lot of pleasure from playing video games and building Lego and that sort of thing. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being youthful and being sort of wide-eyed about it. And that's one of the things I think I do bring to the table. A lot of people are very grown up, and I still come at this sport from a very youthful, joyful place. And I think that is very important. A lot of people, I see them and they commentate or they present or they produce, and I kind of think you've fallen into the habit of doing this because it's what you do. Where's the love for it? Where's the passion for it coming from? And for me, I think if you're doing something because you do it rather than because you love doing it, then you're never going to give your best work. And I've found that if I'm doing something just because I can, there's no enjoyment factor, then anybody could do it. For me, I've got to bring the fact that I love it to the table. Otherwise, there's a lot of people coming up the ranks who are far better than me technically. The fact that I bring as much energy and excitement to it and intensity to it, I think is what separates me from a lot. And I've got fans of it and I've got critics of it. But at the end of the day, as long as the client is happy, as long as the person paying your checks is happy, then that's the main thing. And I'm very, very fortunate in that the last 12 years, on the whole, I've been able to work with people who get me, who understand me as a commentator, who understand me as a broadcaster, and know that my style is very much edge of your seat. You're going to get very, very excited, probably too excited, but you know what? The fans are going to keep watching. And I think that's important. You can't just have an event where people will flick it over and go, oh, well, that's all right. Let's see what's happening on the other side. My job is to broadcast and to keep people there. And I think that's one of the things I am good at, is keeping the audience there. I like to feel that they're in the room with me.
Yeah, I mean, my answer to my own question would have been how passionate you are, genuinely. Like, I don't get that from any other commentator. And obviously, I watch a lot of motorsport, so I hear a lot of commentators. And honestly, I
Good for
don't
you.
get
It's the best sport in the world.
everyone should watch a lot of motorsport. And I assume if people are listening to this podcast, they probably watch a lot of motorsport. But yeah,
Mm.
I just think the passion that you give, but also the empathy when you're commentating on drivers who maybe make mistakes because they're learning. They make mistakes because it's their first race in an F4 car. They make mistakes because they're young. And I feel like, always remind the listener, because it's easy to forget that these drivers are 15, 16 in these cars. And I think you always remind the listener, these drivers are very young, they're still learning, they're going to make mistakes. They're not in F1 yet, and this is the time for them to make those mistakes. They're going to grow from them.
Absolutely. It's so important for people to remember that. I mean, I keep making the comparison to people, particularly when they've taken a look at a driver who's made a mistake or crashed into somebody or spun out or hit the wall or whatever, and they immediately leap to, oh, well, he's not very good, or, they've just ruined their career then. But I take the example, if you're watching Manchester United versus Valencia, two of the top European clubs, you're only seeing the first team in action. You never see the under 21 squad match. You never see the under 15s. You never see the junior academy. You never see them playing because those matches are never televised. We never get to see what happens to them. And it's the same in rugby, the same in tennis, the same in cricket, the same in most athletic disciplines of the sport. The junior goodwill games years and years ago, they were only televised really in America. That's about it. And you never really get to see these young athletes crack under pressure. You never really get to see them at their lowest point making mistakes until they are ready to get into the first team. And even then, when you're in the first team or when you're stepping out onto the centre court of Wimbledon, you'll still make mistakes. So you're under massive scrutiny. In motor racing, it's 10 times worse because to get onto the starting grid, it's not like in football or tennis or cricket. You can pick up the bits of equipment that you need for about 20, 30 pounds or equivalent, and then start training, find an aptitude for it, go to your local club, and then it all kind of flows from there. In motor racing, you've got to put down thousands upon thousands of pounds just to get on the grid. I mean, the kids in karting are my heroes. They've been able to get to a point that I never got to when I was a kid. I would have loved to have had the situation where I could put, 20, 30, 40,000 pounds for a season to go racing. It's not even in my radar. So the fact that these guys can do it, that's an incredible achievement. I mean, you can say that, it's motor racing, it's only for the rich kids these days. Well, it's kind of always been for the rich kids. If you go back to 1894, motor racing has always been an exploit for the rich. So you can't really use that argument for the current era. To even get to that point is an achievement. It's the first victory. To even be on the starting grid is a victory. And I look at these guys and think, they're doing something I've never been able to do and probably never will do. So that's something worth recognizing. So if you're going to sit there behind your keyboard and type, well, they're not very good, then are they? You don't even scratch at the surface of what they've gone through to be there. And even when you get to Formula One, look at, the mistakes that people like Lewis Hamilton, Charles Leclerc, Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez, Carlos Sainz, these guys are still making mistakes at Formula One level. And you obviously want to, ridicule them if you're in that position because you feel, well, they're at the top of their game. So the certain comments that you throw at the young kids, that can be the difference between making or breaking a career, never mind what they're doing on the circuit. These guys are always going to learn at their own pace. They're always going to develop at their own speed. And I think we as a community need to allow them the grace to grow. You can't really put that much intensity and pressure on them that has already been put on them. I mean, these kids are being televised at international level in the AAMI European Karting Series from the age of 9 years old. I mean, that is unbelievable pressure to put straight into, your professional motorsport career. You're on television, you're a star at the age of 9. And I couldn't cope with that pressure easily. And I don't think anybody who's criticizing these guys could either. So it's a very, very tough world. And I think people need to be just a little bit more gracious about the fact that these guys are in the middle of their education.
Completely agree. And it's nice to see you as a commentator, like reminding people of that. Because I think it is easy when, they get out the car and you see, my goodness, they're young. But when they're in the car, because they're going so fast and they're doing so well, it is hard to remember sometimes. And I think as well, a lot of people who start watching the feeder series for the first time don't always realize that the age of some of these kids. And you mentioned the criticism that they receive, but also you mentioned that you yourself, some people love your style of commentary. You've had others who have criticized it. And obviously, as a commentator, it is kind of a public facing, even when you're not commentating, people can't see you, but you are still putting a service out to the public. And I think people quite often feel that that entitles them to make their opinion known. How do you kind of handle that? And also another kind of part of that question is, do you think that commentary is something that people like just think I could do that? Like kind of like you said with the driving, like Do you think people kind of see it and think anyone can do that? It's easy, when obviously that's not the case at all.
It's a really good pair of questions. How do I cope with the intensity of the scrutiny? I've evolved over the years, but it's very, very difficult sometimes when, we're all ambitious people in motorsport. It's very competitive. And I don't think it's just drivers and teams that are competitive. I think people in the industry are competitive as well. Mechanics are trying to work their way up from the junior ladder to Formula One someday. They want to be part of that lifestyle. And I think it would be ridiculous to deny that broadcasters want to climb the ladder. They want to be in Formula One, IndyCar, NASCAR, Le Mans. They want to get to that point. I've had tastes of the top level, and it's very enticing. It's very addictive. When you have a really decent slice of cheesecake and it's the best thing you've ever tasted, you want more of it. And it's the same. I've had a couple of dabbles in Formula One, a couple of dabbles at Le Mans, and a couple of dabbles in different bits and pieces, Formula E, IndyCar. And once you've had a taste of it, you want more. But for whatever reason, whether it's ability, whether it's logistics, whether it's the right time, the right place, the right job, it doesn't always work out. And I'm still waiting for the full-time gig in those to arrive. If it ever does, there's a good chance it may not. There's a good chance it will. So you have to be prepared for the likelihood of people saying no. And it's difficult to hear no all the time, especially when you feel you're doing everything that you possibly can to climb the ladder. I tend to find that it's good to switch off everything for 24 hours. I try and do that now a little bit more than I used to. The beauty of having kids is you can get lost in their universe for a little while. So I try to do that. I also find that just doing something that's completely away from motor racing for a little while can be very helpful. I've got a few little hobbies that I delve into after races that are really, really good for me. So whether that's mucking about on video games, whether that's building a little bit of Lego, I have a massive comedy collection, an audiobook collection on Audible, and I just kind of lose myself in there with a walk or a run or something. And it can be good to sort of detach. It used to get me really, really bad. And I will be the first one to confess that I used to get very green with envy. And it used to be very, very difficult to sort of cope with, the rejection and seeing other people that are very, very good at their job getting further ahead than you. And it can be very, very demoralizing. You have to kind of be prepared for the fact that, this isn't going to be your week, mate. You have to kind of remind yourself that you're in a very privileged position and you're still working with some amazing championships and you're working with incredible drivers. I've been very fortunate in that, I've been watching the climb of people like Andrea Kimi Antonelli and Oliver Bearman and Taylor Barnard and all these people since 2018. And you get to watch these guys firsthand. And now they're superstars. Within 3 or 4 years, these guys are going to be in Formula One. I mean, if you think that when I first started in the sport, I was working with people like Lando Norris and George Russell and Zhou Guanyu at the very beginning of their careers, and now they're in Formula One. It's crazy, and it's wonderful to feel that you're part of that journey. Obviously, from my side, you obviously have to just keep improving and keep evolving, and I think you just have to keep your head in the game. You have to remind yourself that it's not all going to happen at once. I'm very much a subscriber that good things come to those who wait. I've been waiting and working for 12 years, and I think it's probably going to take another 12 years. You get your opportunities sometimes all at once, or it just happens by chance. And the comfort I take is that, Murray Walker didn't get Formula One full time until he was 48. Well, I'm 38, so I've still got a bit of time to be competing with him. So, there's still chances. In terms of the second part of the question, it can be very interesting to hear what people have to say about it. And, you sometimes take scrutiny. I used to take scrutiny very hard. I used to take it very, very tough, particularly in the early days of my career when I used to work in the stock cars and the banger racing and the oval championships. You'd get very fruity comments from people. There was a particular event I remember doing, which was a North versus South banger race event. And so there were drivers from the North, drivers from the South, and of course there were fans from the North and fans from the South. And they kind of split the commentary between myself and my good friend Dave Goddard, who's a Northerner. And one particular comment came through was that the Southern commentator should drown in his own vomit, then he'll sound good. which I thought was quite creative. It was a not bad comment. Not bad. Oh, well done. Came up with something original. Yeah, I mean, you have to remind yourself that you're not going to be everybody's cup of tea. You know, you can't please everybody. It doesn't matter how good an actor Matt Damon is, not everybody's going to like his movies. It doesn't matter how good a performer Margot Robbie is, you know, not everybody's going to like her performances. And it just comes down to individual taste. You have to remind yourself that as long as the client is happy, as long as they keep bringing you back, as long as they want you, then you're doing okay. That's the bottom line. You know, the fans are very important, and I do try wherever possible to meet the uh, acceptance and the sort of the support of the fans. And I know I'm not going to have a million fans. Some of my critics have been fairly high profile, particularly of late. You know, I ended up having a very interesting conversation and debate about it with Tiff Needell, of all people. You know, very respected guy. He's entitled to his opinion, and not everybody's going to like what I do and how I do it. But it's a free country. It's a free world. We're supposed to have freedom of speech. Not everybody's going to be your supporter. As long as you've got enough people that believe in your ability, as long as your client believes in you, and ultimately, as long as you believe in yourself, then I think that's all that really matters.
Absolutely. You mentioned so many drivers in there as well who I've been wanting to ask you about, like Andrea Kimi Antonelli, Behrman, Barnard.
Mm,
Obviously, you've seen them since the start of, you've seen them grow into the drivers they are, really.
mm.
Who, out of all the drivers who you've seen progress up the ladder from the very early days of karting to where they are now, who do you think has inspired you the most? Who do you think has the most unbelievable story out of all of them?
It's a really good question. Obviously, we were all very much excited now about people like Arvid Lindblad, who I've been watching since he was like 9 years old. Freddie Slater's coming through. Taylor Barnard's up there. Kimmy, Tucker, Ugo, so many great kids that we've watched through. And obviously Ollie, I will never forget Oliver Behrman drenching me completely at the podium ceremony at Marienburg 2019. I still owe him for that. Um, the only driver who's ever thought, no, the commentator deserves it, not the other drivers. I think the one that really kind of inspires me the most actually is Taylor Barnard. He's had so many stumbles in his career, so many problems where it all looked like it was over. I remember being there at the World Championship at Kristianstad in 2018 when he had the full support, inverted commas, of Nico Rosberg. And it all kind of unraveled very, very quickly for him over the next 18 months. And, he was there to win the World Championship. He should have won it both years that he tried, 18 and 19. And all the way through, he has had the ability to climb. He has always been an incredible talent, a phenomenal fighter, an amazing driver, a real analytical athlete. He is very, very good on his feedback and his data. He's a real team player as well. He's not just very self-centered. He's very, very good at building the whole team, teammates included. Around the whole operation. And there's not many feeder drivers who are like that. A lot of drivers are very intrusive and very, very secretive. They don't want to keep things they don't want to reveal too much that's going on. Taylor is very more holistic as a competitor. He has to feel, from his point of view, I think, that you're never going to move forward unless the whole team is going in the same direction, and that includes the teammates. So what I've seen from him of late, certainly in the last 2-3 years, is just his tenacity and his determination, but also his camaraderie. He's really good at building a team around him. And I feel that he has landed completely on his feet with PHM AIX. I think they are the right people to drive him forward. I've spent, 6 weeks with him out in Dubai and kind of been listening to his version of events of how he's been battling for the title. And it's very, very hard when you're a commentator to switch off your bias in the back of your head. You want all these guys to win, especially when you're really, really close friends with most of them. You kind of want them all to take the victory. And when they don't, and the reason why, you feel the emotiveness of it all. With Taylor, I just feel that of all the drivers out there, there's two real British stars at the moment that I feel are going to get all the way to the top purely on natural talent rather than money. And that's Taylor Barnard and Luke Browning.
Thank you for
Luke
saying
has
that.
been, yeah, well, I've got a real affection for Luke because Luke was the first driver I ever did any direct work with. So back in about 2015, 16, I'm sure that they're going to correct me about this, but he was in the Junior Saloon Car Championship in Citroen Saxos back in the day. And the way he went from 12th on the starting grid at Rockingham to third by turn two, you can't do that unless you're something very, very special indeed. And I thought that day, hang on a minute, there's something here. And at that time, I was kind of thinking, well, maybe we'll see him on the grid at Le Mans one day. No way did I, or even they, the parents, I think, well, he's going to be Formula One bound. And now here he is with Williams, having just won the Macau Grand Prix and genuinely looking like a title contender now in Formula 3. And I'll be very, very honest, when I watched that on Saturday morning, I was bawling like a schoolgirl. Absolutely. It was just such an emotion for me to see how much hard work he's done over the last decade, to be there and finally, getting the job done and showing people what he can really do and putting the doubters to bed. It's just so nice that people like Taylor and Luke are really achieving it and are really kind of doing it on their own merit. And it's a real honor, actually, to be a small part of that jigsaw puzzle, just to have been a little bit of it. It's actually really, really beautiful to kind of watch that happen in front of you.
I think with both Taylor and Luke, they both quite similar in the sense that they both had moments where it was a bit like, are they going to be able to continue their careers? Is this the end for them? I know after Luke won his BB3 campaign, everyone was a bit like, where's he going? Because he didn't have the backing of Williams at that point, and he didn't have the budget at that point either. So I think that's what makes both of their stories so unique and special. The fact that there were moments where it seemed like this isn't going to happen for them, not because of talent by any means. The talent was always there, but it was always external factors.
Yeah, it's a tough one for these guys. I think everybody assumes that everyone who's involved in racing just has a billion quid to burn. And it's very, very difficult, especially considering as inflation increases year upon year, and the global economy becomes more and more unmanageable, the cost of racing just goes up and up every single year. I can remember a point when no way would you be spending £1 million a year racing in Formula 3, for example. Now it's way more than that. So it's bonkers, it's absolutely insane the amount of money that you're having to find to go racing at that level. So I think the fact that Taylor and Luke are still there and are still, a stone's throw away from it and are still finding opportunities to, better themselves and to make progress, it shows that there is still space in the motor racing ladder for drivers who have just got the tenacity. If you look at some certain drivers who have literally gone above and beyond to try and make the Formula One thing happen. You've got people like Nigel Mansell, Johnny Herbert, to a certain extent, even Jenson Button. There's kind of drivers who have literally worked tooth and nail and sold everything, scrimped and saved, slept in the back of vans and things at race meetings to try and make it work. And those are the real stories that I think people get behind. Those are the people that, we laud as heroes. I would love to see a Formula One 10 years from now where both Taylor and Luke are on the grid, because I think it would just renew my faith in the fact that it's not just about the money. It's not just about people who have got an unlimited budget to get there. And I think 10 years from now, there's a good chance that the Formula One grid is going to be filled with 20 people that I have literally seen as kids around the back of, race circuits and even kicked football around with a few of them. But it would just be nice for a handful of those drivers to be there because they are destined to be there on pure talent. There's not been a lot of money involved in the story. The third one I would say that I would add to that list, along with Taylor and with Luke, is actually Tuukka Taponen. I can remember in 2019 in the European Championships, we came to Angeville in France, and all the major championship teams were there. So you've got your Tony Karts, your Biralarts, your CRGs, your Sodis, and these are like the Ferraris, Mercedes, Red Bulls, and of the karting world. And we know that the champion is going to come from one of those teams. And up rocks this little shy kid from Finland, couldn't really string 3 or 4 words together, for the Kotala sports team, which is only really found in Finland, and came in and at the final got into the lead, I think halfway around the first lap, and we never saw him again because he was just so far up front. And everybody in the whole paddock was just, who the hell is this kid? We've never even heard of this kid. And he's going up against all of the proven stars of the paddock, all the people that we were predicting to be big names. And I think it's days like that where you just have to remind yourself, talent will always win out. It will always be, the real stars that will put themselves out there and showcase what they can really do. That's where this sport really, really thrives. Yes, you can have drivers rock up with the right money and get it done, but the talent is always going to rise to the top. The people who know within the inside, they know who the right drivers are. And what's really good to me is that, yes, there is a business factor. The Mercedes, the Red Bulls, the Williams, the Haas's, they do need a driver with funds, but they know who the top drivers are in Formula 2, Formula 3, Formula Regional, Formula 4. They know. They're not stupid. They do look down at the lower ladder level. They'll be able to see these drivers like Taylor, like Luke, like Tucker, like Kimi Antonelli, these kind of guys who are maybe not necessarily always putting the results together, but they'll be able to look at them and go, that's who we need in 3-4 years. We'll just bookmark that. We'll keep an eye on it. And, these guys, we will try and make an opportunity. Yes, a lot of it does come down to who's bringing the funds. But, these guys are not idiots. They'll be looking for the drivers that will make them win races as well. So I do still have faith that a lot of these guys are going to get their shot.
Stay tuned for part 2 coming next week.